Welcome back to our channel, where we'll be delving deep into the most compelling tragedies of Genoa. Today is a great day to unravel the intricate webs of betrayal, ambition, and suffering that have shaped our favorite characters. Let's step into the shadows of the Newman and Abbott empire. The walls of the Spectra Charles Executive Office felt less like a sanctuary and more like a beautifully decorated tomb for Sally Spectra, as she found herself drowning in an agonizing ocean of despair. The air within the room was thick, practically suffocating her as she stared blankly at the panoramic view of Genoa City, a skyline that now represented nothing but impending doom. Everything she had painstakingly built, every ounce of sweat, tears, and relentless ambition she had poured into her fashion and media empire, was currently teetering on the absolute brink of total annihilation. This catastrophic reality was not the result of a poor business decision or a sudden shift in market trends, but rather the devastating fallout of a deeply personal and profound betrayal. Billy Abbott, the man who was supposed to be her partner, her fierce protector, and the loving father of her unborn child, had recklessly detonated the fragile, highly classified secret she had been harboring for months. By publicly and viciously exposing the illicit financial payout she had secretly received from Adam Newman in exchange for the quiet surrender of Newman Media, Billy had effectively painted a massive, glowing target directly onto Sally's back. He had unleashed the apocalyptic wrath of Victor Newman, a man whose vengeance was legendary throughout the corporate world and entirely devoid of human mercy. Victor now possessed the knowledge that his own son had circumvented his authority to funnel capital to a rival, and his predictable response would be to systematically dismantle Spectra Charles piece by piece. Sally knew with chilling certainty that Victor would not rest until she was financially ruined, professionally disgraced, and entirely erased from the Genoa City business landscape. The sheer terror of this realization sent violent shivers down her spine, paralyzing her with a visceral fear that threatened to consume her entirely. This immense psychological toll was compounded exponentially by her fragile physical state, as the stress began to manifest as a toxic venom coursing through her veins, directly threatening the delicate life growing inside her. The ghost of Ava Hope Newman, the precious daughter she had tragically lost in the past, haunted her every waking moment, casting a dark, suffocating shadow over her current pregnancy. Sally was entirely consumed by the terrifying paranoia that history was destined to repeat itself, that the crushing anxiety brought on by Billy's selfish crusade would inevitably trigger another devastating medical crisis. She felt an overwhelming primal instinct to shield her unborn child from the toxic radiation of the Abbott and Newman corporate warfare, yet she found herself trapped directly in the epicenter of the blast zone. The profound realization that Billy had prioritized his obsessive vendetta against Adam over the safety and well-being of his own expanding family shattered the foundational trust of their romantic relationship. Driven by a sheer, desperate need for survival, Sally began to frantically formulate a highly dangerous, unauthorized contingency plan to salvage whatever remained of her shattered life. She knew with absolute certainty that she could never defeat Victor Newman in a traditional boardroom battle or a protracted legal war of attrition. Her only viable option was to negotiate a humiliating surrender that masqueraded as a strategic compromise, a desperate maneuver that required her to swallow every ounce of her remaining pride. She resolved to secretly seek out Adam Newman once again, hoping to broker an entirely new, deeply clandestine agreement that could magically erase the target from her back. Her concept was agonizingly simple, yet fraught with insurmountable peril. She would willingly return every single cent of the illicit Newman Media payout to Adam, effectively reversing the financial transaction. In exchange for this massive financial concession, Sally required one impossible concession from the Newman empire: a legally binding, ironclad written guarantee that Victor Newman would permanently back off and leave Spectra Charles entirely untouched. She fully recognized the absolute absurdity of this desperate plan, essentially asking a bloodthirsty predator to politely accept a refund after it had already tasted the blood of its prey. Yet, as she stared into the abyss of her impending ruin, she realized that she had absolutely no other alternatives left to explore. The moral and relational conflict of sneaking behind Billy's back for a second time weighed heavily on her conscience, creating a sickening knot in the pit of her stomach. She knew with terrifying clarity that if Billy ever discovered she was actively seeking out Adam to negotiate yet another secret pact, his fragile ego and deep-seated paranoia would explode into uncontrollable violence. However, The man Sally was desperately seeking out for salvation was currently completely incapable of protecting anyone, as Adam Newman was currently drowning in the cataclysmic destruction of his own fabricated reality. The recent earth-shattering DNA test results had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that he possessed absolutely no biological connection to Victor Newman, a revelation that had entirely obliterated his identity. Instead, the horrifying scientific data confirmed that he was the biological offspring of Nicky Newman and a deeply buried, ancient enemy of the Newman patriarch, a truth that had plunged the entire family into unprecedented chaos. When Sally finally managed to track Adam down, hoping to find the arrogant, calculating corporate tactician she had once loved, she was instead met with a hollow, weeping shell of a broken man. Adam was vibrating with a toxic mixture of raw devastation and paralyzing terror, standing completely defenseless in the direct path of Victor's impending biblical retribution. Despite his entirely shattered psychological state, Adam listened to Sally's frantic, tearful plea for a new protective agreement, his heart breaking as he realized the sheer, tragic impossibility of her desperate request. He was forced to look into the terrified eyes of the woman he still deeply cared for and deliver the crushing blow that he was entirely powerless to stop the incoming slaughter. Adam agonizingly explained that he possessed absolutely no leverage, no influence, and no control over Victor's actions, especially now that Victor was operating on a lethal, deeply personal fury regarding his own wife's ultimate betrayal. He could not offer Sally a written guarantee, a verbal promise, or even a fleeting glimmer of hope, because Victor was no longer a rational businessman. He was a wrathful god intent on burning his entire world to the ground. The heartbreaking realization that her final, desperate gamble had failed spectacularly washed over Sally, leaving her entirely adrift in a sea of inescapable doom. Simultaneously, across the city, Billy Abbott was rapidly descending into his own terrifying labyrinth of paranoia, madness, and deeply entrenched psychological trauma. The recent soul-crushing revelation delivered by his dying mother, Jill, confirming that Jack Abbott was his true biological father, had completely fractured his fundamental understanding of his own existence. This profound identity crisis, coupled with the immense, suffocating pressure of his ruthless corporate takeover at Chancellor Industries, had severely compromised his grip on reality. Billy was operating on a dangerous cocktail of extreme sleep deprivation, bubbling rage, and a toxic, self-righteous belief that he was the only remaining bastion of truth in a world built entirely on malicious lies. His mind, desperately seeking a tangible enemy to anchor his spiraling anxiety, began to violently project his internal chaos directly onto Sally. Billy became entirely consumed by the dark, insidious delusion that Sally was not a tragic victim of his reckless actions, but rather a willing, treacherous conspirator actively plotting his ultimate downfall. His fractured mind began to twist her entirely justified fear and emotional withdrawal into irrefutable evidence of romantic and corporate treason, convincing himself that she was secretly aligning with his greatest enemy. The historical, deeply toxic rivalry between Billy and Adam acted as a highly flammable accelerant to this growing paranoia, transforming his suspicions into absolute, undeniable facts within his distorted perception. In Billy's unhinged reality, Adam was the eternal, omnipresent boogeyman, a dark shadow that existed solely to corrupt, steal, and destroy everything that Billy held dear. The mere agonizing thought of Sally and Adam existing in the same room, whispering secrets in the dark, was enough to trigger a violent, uncontrollable psychological break within him. Driven by a dark, obsessive, and entirely irrational need to uncover the treacherous truth he believed was being maliciously hidden from him, Billy began to relentlessly track Sally's covert movements. He utilized his vast resources and his own manic energy to stalk the mother of his unborn child through the dimly lit, labyrinthine streets of Genoa City, his mind swirling with horrifying, fabricated scenarios. Every shadow he passed seemed to mock him, every distant siren sounding like a warning that his entire life was being systematically dismantled by the woman he loved and the man he despised. When Billy finally located Sally, discovering her in a hushed, incredibly intense, and emotionally charged conversation with Adam in a secluded location, his absolute worst paranoid delusions were instantly validated. From his distorted, deeply traumatized vantage point, their desperate exchange of survival tactics looked exactly like a clandestine lover's rendezvous and a treacherous, calculated alliance designed specifically to ruin him. The visual confirmation of this perceived betrayal acted as the final, cataclysmic hammer blow that completely shattered the last remaining fragments of Billy's fragile restraint. The cumulative, agonizing trauma of his mother's lifelong lies, the manipulative machinations of his corporate rivals, and now what he perceived as his fiance's ultimate, unforgivable betrayal pushed him entirely over the psychological precipice. He was no longer a rational businessman, a loving partner, or a hopeful father-to-be. He was a cornered, deeply wounded animal, operating purely on violent, unrestrained instinct. The simmering rage that had been boiling just beneath the surface of his skin for weeks finally erupted into a blinding, white-hot fury that entirely bypassed his logical faculties. He felt a sickening sense of absolute clarity wash over him, a terrifying conviction that the only way to stop the relentless cycle of betrayal was to violently sever the connection at its source. Still carrying the heavy, lethal weapon he had procured during his previous, highly volatile and dangerous confrontation with Kane Ashby, Billy stepped out of the concealing shadows with a terrifying, dead-eyed calmness. The cold, unforgiving metal gripped tightly in his trembling hand instantly transformed him from a heartbroken victim into the ultimate instrument of misdirected, apocalyptic vengeance. The atmosphere in the secluded alleyway turned instantly lethal, the air growing so dense and heavy with impending tragedy that it became physically difficult to draw a breath. Sally and Adam, entirely consumed by their own shared despair, were completely oblivious to the angel of death, slowly approaching them until the ominous click of the weapon's hammer, echoing in the silence, froze the blood in their veins. They turned in agonizing slow motion, their eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated terror as they registered the hollow, unrecognizable face of the man standing before them. Without a single word spoken, without a moment of hesitation or a desperate plea for explanation, the unbearable tension that had been suffocating Genoa City finally snapped with devastating finality. The blinding, explosive flash of muzzle fire violently illuminated the surrounding darkness, freezing the horrified, desperate expressions of Sally and Adam in a terrifying, unforgettable tableau of impending death. As the deafening, ear-splitting crack of the gunshot echoed relentlessly through the silent, sleeping city, it carried with it the permanent destruction of countless lives and the shattering of innocent futures. A thick, acrid cloud of smoke hung heavily in the chilling air, masking the immediate, bloody aftermath of a paranoid mind pushed entirely past the point of no return. As the echoes faded into a ringing silence, a catastrophic, chilling question remained suspended in the darkness. Had Billy Abbott, blinded by his own toxic delusions, just executed the mother of his unborn child in a fit of irredeemable madness?